I was 29 years old when my stepsister Emily came to live with us. Our parents had recently married, and she had to move into our house for a job opportunity in the city. At first, it was a little strange. After all, we were practically strangers despite being family. Now, she was my stepmother's daughter from a previous marriage, and I had never had contact with her before. Emily was a few years younger than me, full of energy and always very affectionate. I remember the first day she arrived. She was a little shy, but soon relaxed. She had a way about her that would light up any room. Her presence was a breath of fresh air in our home. She always had a joke prepared, or a funny story that made me laugh. The initial strangeness disappeared quickly. She had a special ability to make people feel comfortable around her. Soon, we were sharing meals, laughing together, and discovering common interests. We loved to watch series and movies, and many nights we spent hours on the couch commenting on each scene, laughing out loud as if we were lifelong friends. Emily was also a great help. She helped with the housework, always willing to lend a hand, and had a sweet way of worrying about me if I looked tired or stressed. She was always ready to help out. If I seemed tired or stressed, she always asked me if everything was okay, offered to make me tea, or just sat beside me quietly, keeping me company. It was comforting to have someone like that around. One evening, after a particularly hot day, we were sitting on the porch drinking ice-cold lemonade. She told me about the new job, her expectations and anxieties. I listened intently, delighted by the passion she showed for what she did. At some point, our gazes met in a different, more intense way. That spark, however, was quickly quenched by reason. She was my stepsister, and I could not afford to let these confused feelings gain strength. But at the same time, I could not deny the connection that was beginning to form between us, something that went beyond simple family life. Our relationship continued to develop, full of laughter, deep conversations, and an ever-increasing closeness. Emily, with her charming and affectionate manner, gradually gained a special space in my heart, and little did I know that this change was just the beginning of something much bigger and more complicated. This was just the introduction of how it all began. As the days went by, the daily coexistence brought to the surface feelings and the passion she showed for what she was doing. Emily and I started spending a lot of time together. Our house was big, but it seemed we always preferred to be near each other. We watched movies and series, exchanged funny comments, and laughed late into the night. She always found a way to make me laugh, even on days when I was more tired or busy because of work. I remember one particular night, we were watching a comedy movie she had chosen. Emily had a peculiar taste in movies, but her comments were always hilarious. She sat next to me on the couch, and during one particularly funny scene, she laughed so hard she ended up spilling popcorn all over the place. We both laughed until we cried, and at that moment, I realized how good it was to have her company. She brought a lightness and a joy I hadn't felt in a long time. The conversations were also deep. We talked about our dreams, fears, and hopes. Emily had a very optimistic worldview, and that rubbed off on me. I felt I could talk to her about anything without fear of being judged, and she seemed to feel the same way. It was as if we had created a little world of our own, where nothing bad could touch us. Then one hot summer night, she asked me a favour. We were sitting on the balcony drinking chilled wine when she mentioned that the air conditioning in her room had broken. She said it was unbearably hot in there and asked if she could sleep in my room for a few nights until the problem was solved. I thought about it for a moment, and honestly, I didn't see any problem. After all, we were family. She was my stepsister and we trusted each other. That first night, she slept in my room. I put a mattress on the floor for her. She joked that it looked like she was camping, and we laughed together before going to sleep. As I lay in my bed, I could hear her soft and even breathing. That close presence brought me a strange feeling of comfort and uneasiness at the same time. In the following days, the routine was the same. Emily slept in my room, and I started to get used to her presence. Sometimes before bed, we would talk in the dark, sharing stories and secrets. She would talk about her adventures in her youth, and I would share stories of my life before she came along. They were intimate moments, and I felt a stronger and stronger connection with her. It was a very special time for me, and I started to get used to her presence in my room. It was on one of those nights that I realised that something was changing between us. We were lying down, and she reached out her hand, lightly touching mine. I felt a shiver run through my body. There was something more in that contact, something that went beyond simple affection. I didn't know how to deal with it, but I couldn't ignore the intensity of that moment. And so, day after day, night after night, Emily's presence became a constant in my life. That close relationship began to awaken feelings that I never imagined I would feel for her, feelings that, although confusing, were undeniable. The first night everything seemed normal. We talked a little before going to bed, as we always did. Emily was lying on the mattress next to my bed, and we both laughed at the stories she told about her childhood. The conversation went on, and soon we turned off the lights. The silence of the night took over the room, and I closed my eyes. However, in the middle of the night, I woke up suddenly. Something was different. I slowly opened my eyes, and in the dimness of the room, I saw Emily approaching me. She was so close I could feel her warm and even breathing. My heart raced instantly, pounding my chest like a drum. She whispered my name, her voice soft and full of something I couldn't identify. She was so close I could see the glint in her eyes, even in the darkness. The room was filled with a palpable tension, almost electric. I felt completely vulnerable, as if I was exposed to an emotional precipice. I felt a mixture of fear and excitement. Emily, my stepsister, someone I considered my family, was there, so close I could almost hear her thoughts. "What are you doing, Emily?" I whispered in response, trying to control my breathing, which was now rapid and uneven. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she reached out and lightly touched my face, running her fingers across my skin. It was a soft touch, almost imperceptible, but it made my whole body react. I closed my eyes, trying to process what was happening. Her touch was warm, and where her fingers ran, they left a feeling of goosebumps. "I can't stop thinking about you," she finally said, her voice a little firmer but still whispering. The confession hung in the air, heavy and intense. I felt like my heart was going to burst out of my chest. I didn't know what to say. A part of me wanted to push her away, tell her this was wrong, but another part, a deeper and hidden part, was curious, intrigued, and in a way, longing for that contact. Emily leaned even closer, her lips now inches away from mine. I could feel her breathing and my whole body was on alert. The world seemed to have stopped, and the only thing that existed at that moment was her and me, lost in that moment. Without thinking about it, our lips met. It was a soft kiss at first, hesitant, but soon it became more intense, full of all the repressed feelings we had kept until that moment. It was as if a dam had been broken, releasing a torrent of emotions that we could no longer contain. "Emily, this can't happen," I said with a trembling voice, but my treacherous eyes said something else. She looked at me, her face a mixture of desire and confusion. "Mark, I know it's complicated, but I can't ignore what I feel for you," she answered with a voice full of emotion. I was torn. My body and my heart were at war, and I didn't know how to get out of that situation. That night changed everything. The tension between us was only increasing, and every little gesture, every look, took on a new weight. I knew we were treading on dangerous ground, but a part of me couldn't resist. And so, we began to meet more frequently, to share more and more intimate and intense moments. The line between good and evil began to blur, and I was trapped in a whirlwind of emotion that I couldn't control. What happened next was a mixture of confusion and excitement. Emily kissed me, and for a moment, I kissed her back. It felt surreal, almost as if I was dreaming. The sensation of her lips against mine was hot and electrifying. For a few seconds, I allowed myself to sink into that moment, letting myself be carried away by the whirlwind of feelings that had built up between us. But then, reality hit hard. Realizing that she was my stepsister, that we were breaking all the rules, hit me like a bucket of cold water. I pushed her away quickly, almost pushing her away, and whispered in a trembling voice, "Emily, this can't happen. It's wrong." She pulled away, looking as confused as I did. "I'm sorry, Mark. I don't know what came over me. I just couldn't control myself." Her voice was full of regret, but also something else, something I couldn't hide. desire. Those words echoed in my mind as I tried to process everything. My heart was still beating wildly, and the room was spinning around me. The rest of the night was a torment of thoughts. I lay in bed, but I couldn't fall asleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt Emily's lips on mine, her soft touch on my skin. As the clock ticked slowly, my mind was in total chaos. I knew what had happened was wrong, but I also knew that I couldn't ignore how I felt. There was an undeniable chemistry between us, something that couldn't be forgotten or swept under the rug. The tension that until then had been a spark was now a fire that was hard to extinguish. In the morning, I woke up with a heavy feeling in my chest. The sun was already up, and I knew I needed to face Emily again. When I finally left the room, I found her in the kitchen making coffee. She looked up when she saw me, and for a moment, the silence between us was deafening. "Emily, we need to talk," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. We sat down at the table, and I explained to her that what happened could not happen again, that we needed to keep things as they were, as a family. She agreed, although it was clear she wasn't entirely convinced. The next few days were difficult. There was an elephant in the room that neither of us mentioned. We went about our routine, trying to act normal, but the tension was always there. Every accidental touch, every lingering glance brought back the memory of that night. I tried to concentrate on work, on my responsibilities, but my mind kept going back to Emily. At night, in the silence of my room, I remembered the kiss, the warmth of her presence, and wondered how things had gotten to that point. Living together became a delicate game of control and repressed desire. We both knew there was a fine line between us, a line we should not cross again. But the proximity, the constant presence of each other made that line harder and harder to see. And so, between the confusion of emotions and the reality around us, we continued to navigate in a sea of uncertainty. Every day was a battle between what we felt and what we knew was right. I couldn't help but wonder if at some point that tension would finally break us, or if we would find a way to coexist with the secret we shared. In the days that followed, we avoided talking about what happened. The tension between us was evident, but we tried to act normal. It was as if we were walking on eggshells, our emotions a stream flowing under the surface. Finally, Emily returned to her room. The air conditioning was fixed, and she had an excuse to escape. We no longer spent the evenings watching movies together, and our conversations became brief and superficial. It was as if we were both trying to build an invisible barrier to protect ourselves from what we were feeling. I decided not to tell anyone what had happened, and to keep that secret to myself. It was a weight I carried in my chest, a mixture of guilt and desire that I could not share with anyone. Sometimes I looked at Emily and saw the same struggle reflected in her eyes. I knew she was also dealing with that inner turmoil, trying to understand what it all meant. Emily and I moved on with our lives, but that moment deeply marked our relationship. Every time we looked at each other, that episode seemed to be silently present, always there, reminding us of what almost happened. No matter how hard we tried to act as if nothing had changed, the truth was that everything had changed. There were moments when the tension between us was almost unbearable. If we were alone in the kitchen preparing dinner, I could feel the warmth of her gaze following me. Every accidental contact, every approach was charged with an unspoken intensity. We tried to keep the conversation light, but our bodies betrayed our true feelings. One night during a family dinner, our gazes met for a brief second. It was quick, but intense. In that gaze was all the repressed desire, all the confusion and guilt. I quickly looked away, trying to concentrate on the small talk that was circulating at the table, but my heart was beating uncontrollably. Emily seemed equally distressed, and I noticed that she barely touched her food. On weekends, when the house was full of activity and our parents were present, the tension seemed to ease a little, but in the stillness of the night, when everyone was asleep and silence reigned, it was impossible to forget. I remembered every detail of that night, every whispered word, every touch. The internal struggle between desire and reason was constant. I decided to concentrate on work. I tried to occupy my mind with other things. I went out more with friends. I tried to distract myself with hobbies, but nothing seemed to work. There was always a moment when my mind went back to Emily, to what had happened and what could have happened. Even as time went by, that episode continued to haunt me, trying to find a balance that always seemed out of reach. One evening, several weeks later, I came home to find Emily sitting on the porch. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with an emotion I couldn't quite place. "Mark, I can't keep pretending," she said, her voice trembling with a mixture of resolve and vulnerability. I felt a lump form in my throat as I sat down next to her. "What do you mean?" I asked, even though I knew exactly what she was referring to. "I can't keep pretending that nothing happened between us, that those feelings don't exist," she continued. "I can't keep ignoring the way I feel about you." Her words hung in the air, heavy with a truth that we had both been avoiding. I felt my heart racing again, the same mixture of fear and desire coursing through me. "Emily, we can't do this," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "We're family. We can't let this ruin everything." She looked at me, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I know it's complicated, Mark, but I can't help how I feel, and I don't think you can either." I wanted to deny it, to tell her that she was wrong, but I couldn't. The truth was that I felt the same way. The connection between us was undeniable, and no matter how much I tried to fight it, it was always there. I reached out and took her hand in mine, feeling the familiar warmth of her touch. "I don't know what to do," I admitted, my voice breaking. She squeezed my hand gently, her touch reassuring. "We'll figure it out together," she said, her voice filled with determination. "We'll take it one step at a time and see where it leads us." In that moment, I realized that despite all the complications, despite the societal norms and the rules we were breaking, I couldn't walk away from her. We were connected in a way that went beyond simple family ties. It was deeper, more profound, and I knew that I couldn't ignore it any longer. We sat on the porch for a long time, holding hands and talking about our feelings, about the future, and the challenges we would face. It wasn't going to be easy, but I felt a sense of hope, a belief that we could find a way to be together without losing ourselves in the process. Over the next few weeks, Emily and I began to navigate our new reality. It was difficult, and there were moments of doubt and fear, but we faced it together. Our relationship grew stronger, built on a foundation of honesty and mutual respect. We still had to keep our feelings hidden from the rest of the family, but in the privacy of our moments alone, we allowed ourselves to be open and vulnerable with each other. The tension that had once been a source of anxiety became a driving force, bringing us closer together in ways I had never imagined. As the months passed, we learned to balance our public and private lives, creating a new normal that allowed us to be together without drawing unwanted attention. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours, and that was enough. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, I realized how far we had come from that first night when everything changed. Emily turned to me, a smile on her face. "I'm glad we took the risk," she said, her eyes reflecting the warm glow of the setting sun. I smiled back, feeling a sense of peace wash over me. "Me too," I replied, squeezing her hand. As we watched the sky turn shades of pink and orange, I knew that our journey was just beginning. With Emily by my side, I felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead.